Greetings to all of you. I'm Pastor Timothy Muse, lead pastor here at St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Alliance, Ohio. And it's a joy to be with you today as we spend time together walking through the Nicene Creed. This is session number 10 on the Nicene Creed, and it's a pleasure to be able to offer this opportunity, this educational chance to be together as we wade through this creedal statement of the church. I would encourage you, if you haven't had the opportunity, to go back and look at some of the previous ones to check out as we've been going through it article by article, somewhat line by line in some circumstances as we've gotten into the critical moments. We're currently now in the second article of the Creed. The Creed is divided up into 3 articles because it represents the proclamation of the triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so each one of those 3-in-1s, we understand God to be 1 in 3, 3 in 1. Same stuff, different identities of the same God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So right now we're in Article 2, which deals with the Son. It deals with Jesus. And of the articles of the Nicene Creed, Article 2 is the longest. It is the biggest because we are dealing with the Word made flesh. We are dealing with fully human, fully divine, the incarnate Jesus Christ, Word come down, Emmanuel, all of the words. And really, quite frankly, if we think about Christianity, if we think about salvific history, if you will, it really all pendulums, it pinpoints on Jesus. So we have the creation of the world and then Israelite history. It comes down to the Messiah and then it branches back out again. So it's that pinpoint, it's that point where God comes down to earth. That's what we're spending the most time on. And that was the most debated piece in all of the Council of Nicaea, was this Jesus. And particularly, as we see in the Creed, the birth, the death, the resurrection, and the whole finite containing the infinite Word made flesh, fully human, fully divine. There were a lot of different understandings about Jesus out there. There was a lot of different teachings happening. And so the church, when it came together under Constantine, it really needed to come up with a definitive, unified statement. And so that's what the Nicene Creed is. So we are in the middle of it. We have dealt with the divine part of Jesus, the first part. So now we are in the human part. And we've covered the birth and the necessity of the virgin birth, in that the Messiah has unknown origins. Well, we know where Jesus comes from geographically, but it is the mystery around his conception that is the unknown origin of the Messiah, which is the necessity of the virgin birth. Not only that, but also Jesus doesn't carry the sin of Adam, which is passed down from generation to generation through human procreation. So then after that, we covered last time was the crucifixion. That he was, for our sake, he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. That's the line that we looked at last time, was around, why he was crucified was for our sake. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice made for us, and crucifixion being the most gruesome and one of, if not the most painful way to die. And Pilate, getting Pilate's name gives us some historical reference. So the next line in the Creed. So last week, for our sake, he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. He suffered death and was buried. He suffered death and was buried. So this is another, again, there's really no unimportant line in the Creed. There are some lines that can be connected together, but this is the heart of the Christian message. This is the heart of the Christian message. I mean, crucified under Pontius Pilate, it's bad enough that the Word made flesh. It's a struggle enough that the Word incarnate would actually take the cross, but then carry the cross to fruition. At any point, Jesus, the divine, could have extricated himself from the cross. At any point, Jesus could have called down the myriad of angels to wipe out the Romans. At any point in time, God could have lashed out with the angel army and ended this. I could just imagine as Jesus is hanging on the cross, I could just imagine God up in heaven holding back the legions of angels as the Prince, the Son, the Word is hanging on that cross. I could just imagine. Now, I mean, obviously, I don't know what that picture would look like. And God, out of benevolence and grace, and who knows, maybe the whole of heaven just bowed down in silence while the Son was on the cross. But nonetheless, Jesus didn't have to die on the cross. He could have taken it to the cross. He could have extricated himself from the cross. So crucifixion, in all human terms, leads to death. I don't think there's anybody that could ever, be put up on the cross and then come back down and survive it. However, we are talking about the Word made flesh here. So we are talking about God incarnate. So it could very well be that God incarnate would have taken the cross and then come off the cross. But that's not what happens. No, what happens is not only does the Son suffer, which there is no crucifixion that doesn't suffer. That's the whole point. Not only does crucifixion lead to death, but it leads to a suffering death. It's a statement. Don't do this. Whatever the crime of this person was, don't do this or you're going to suffer and die. But what we see is that Jesus suffered death. That he actually died. That the life force of God actually ceased to be in him. Now this is very sobering. Now for us as Christians, the proclamation of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. That flows off of our tongue. And it's so ingrained in our theology, our belief, our thinking. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing that it's so ingrained in us that our God died for us. But at the same time, because it's so ingrained in us, we can miss the power of that. We can miss the power of the fact that God, who made heaven and earth, the God who actually is life, dies for us. Remember, it was for our sake that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. It's for our sake that he suffers death. That God actually dies. That the body of Jesus is actually dead. Now this is important because in a number of different things. First is from the historical perspective. There were some in the realm who would claim, there was some in pre-Nicene Council of Nicaea, pre this, when all of these different Christian groups were out there, there were some who claimed that Jesus didn't actually die. That Jesus was in a state of really, really strong sleepiness. Okay? That Jesus didn't actually cease to exist. That his heart didn't stop beating. That breath didn't stop coming out of his nostrils. Now understand that in our current medical culture, we can tell very succinctly whether someone has died or not. We can hear their heartbeat. It's very rare. It's very rare. It happens, but it's very rare that someone is still alive, but yet the signs of life are so dim that they're indetectable. But 2,000 years ago, that's not the case. There are actually stories coming out of voodoo culture that there is an herb or a powder that can put someone so deep into some kind of suspended state that they're still alive but show no signs of life. The ancient Eastern culture has that as well. Now, I don't want to get into mysticism. I don't want to get into other cultures. But the point is this. Jesus wasn't just sleepy. Jesus wasn't just in some form of suspended animation. His body actually dies. Dead. Done. Finished. Over. Last breath. The Word made flesh actually dies. Okay? There's no way around this. There's no way to sugarcoat this. There's no way of saying that he was in some kind of suspended animation, or God put him into some deep sleep or some coma of some form, whatever words we want to use. No, that's not what happened here. What happened here is that Jesus actually literally, completely, 100% is dead. Now, I don't want to sound morbid here, but this is the way it needs to be. This is the way it needs to be. If salvation is going to come through Christ, then Christ must do what all of us are going to do, the debt that all people pay, as some would say. We will all die. That is the one universal thing that we all have in common. We will all die. I mean, let's think about it for a minute. Not all of us is going to know what it means to be a man. Not all of us are going to know what it means to be a woman. And again, there's no criticism in that. It's just to say that if we're going to go down a path, if God is going to go down to a path that is uniform for all of us, then it must be something that we will all experience. Not all of us are going to experience extreme cold. Not all of us are going to experience extreme heat. Not all of us are going to experience complete hunger or total satisfaction when it comes to eating. Not all of us are going to experience love or hate. But all of us will experience death. And the only way that this imperfect, broken identity, this sin-riddled existence to which we are, can enter into the courts of the divine, because nothing sinful comes into God's presence, is for that sinfulness to die, to go away, and be reborn perfect. So death is the avenue to salvation. And if death is the avenue to salvation, then the one who saves must go through that avenue first. How can I cling to a God who promises me salvation on the other side of death? How can I cling to a God when I'm in the midst of suffering if my God hasn't done that for me, with me, before me? That's the thing. This Jesus, unlike any other belief structure in the world, this Jesus, this Word made flesh, actually comes down here, lives a life, experiences what we experience, and then dies completely. Suffers death. So God no longer has some kind of theoretical idea of what it means to die. God actually knows what it means to die, because God died completely. No suspended animation. There's nothing magical or mystical here. This is dead. Dead, dead, dead. Now, of course, this would have been a great pain for the disciples and for those who follow Jesus, because dead is dead. That's it. You're dead, you're done. It's over. No coming back from death. So it would have looked like a massive failure for the Word made flesh, the maker of heaven and earth, the supreme power, to succumb to death. But that's what Jesus does. He succumbs to death. He experiences it. And not only does he die, but he's buried. He's laid in a tomb. So he suffers death, he dies, and he's buried. He is interred. Okay, so once you're put in the tomb, you're put in the tomb. Once you're buried, you're buried. So there's a significant sense of finality to this. There's a significant sense of end here. It is as if God is writing the end of the old world order. And the old world order ends when Christ is placed in the tomb. Now, this is an odd thing, because crucifixion, we hear in the story that Joseph of Arimathea, a believer in Jesus, a Pharisee, comes to Pilate and asks for the body of Jesus to be laid in the tomb. Again, and not to get too gruesome, not to get too detail-oriented, but when someone was crucified, their body was left to hang on the cross until it fell off, because it could no longer hold itself up. It was left to be picked apart by the birds and the weather and exposure. That's why, we read in the scriptures that Jesus was crucified on a place called Golgotha, the place of the skull. It was actually a pile of bones. It was actually a hill of bones. The cross was, the cross was put in the ground, and there's this hill of bones around it because all the bodies that just keep falling off of it. This is not only does Jesus die, but he dies in an extremely horrible way in a very unclean, awful place. I mean, if you can think about like the most imaginable, and fortunately, for us, Hollywood does that for us really well. But prior to Hollywood, I mean, this is just awful stuff. Awful. This is the story of, this is the tale of terribleness. But the fact that God, not only would come down from heaven, but the fact that God would actually die. The fact that God would actually die. Literally, completely die. Is unfathomable. It's unfathomable. Jesus talks in the scriptures about the ultimate in laying down your life for your friend. And he says that maybe someone would die for a good person or a really good person. But Jesus plays out an example of that by dying for the world. A world that didn't want him, a world that didn't deserve it, a world that should have been wiped out in God's wrath, but receives God not only coming down, but ultimately dying. And again, remember, Jesus didn't die at some ripe old age in his bed after having kids and grandkids. Jesus died from execution after a mock trial before those who were supposed to be looking for him. Yes, it was the Romans who killed him. But the Romans didn't want to. Pilate didn't want to kill him. Pilate tried to release him. It was the Jews. It was the Pharisees. It was the chief priests and the scribes. They're the ones that pushed for his execution. So Jesus was executed and he died. Now this is pinnacle for our faith. This is a foundational reality. It's the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Now, obviously, I'm not peeling back anything in the story you don't know. We'll get to the resurrection later. However, it's really important for us to grasp this. It's really important for us to grasp the magnitude of what we're seeing here. The magnitude of Christ's death. He dies. He actually dies. He completely dies. Dead, done, over, finished. There is no way to powder this. He dies in an awful and terrible way. And his body is taken down off the cross. And it is wrapped in linens and spices. And it's laid in the tomb. This great teacher, this healer, this miracle worker, executed and placed in a tomb. That's it. The ministry's over. Now, we know the end of the story, don't get me wrong. We know how this concludes. However, the fact that death is part of this, that's something that no other religious organization, no other belief structure can proclaim. That the love of God is so strong for us that God would actually literally come down and die. That God would actually literally give up life for us. It's amazing. It's amazing. Now, like I said, there were those who believed that Jesus was in some kind of suspended animation, that Jesus was in some kind of sleep or something of that nature, but that's not the case. These tombs, they weren't like hotel rooms. They were sealed. We see in the story of Lazarus in the Gospel of John that there's a big stone that's put in front of the tombs. In our culture, we don't leave bodies laying out on the streets. We bury them. We bury them far enough down that, as the body returns to the earth to which it came from, the living are not, interrupted. So these tombs are sealed. There's no getting out. Once you're in the tomb, you're in the tomb. There's no getting out. So the fact that we proclaim Christ's death and interment is the finality of this. And there's so many ramifications to it. There's so much that goes into this. You know, Jesus talked about it. Jesus knew it was coming. This was all part of the design that God had put forward. But Christ dying, he suffered death and was buried. The finitude of life. He was, the scriptures say that he was about 33. That's what we interpret, give or take. So he was in the prime of his life. But he enraged those who wanted control, and they executed him. So God, being executed like a common criminal by those to whom we're supposed to be watching for him. The miscarriage of justice is huge. But what we really need to hone down here on, and this would have been a huge debate. This would have been one of the three major debates in the lifespan of Jesus: the birth, the death, and the resurrection. Those would have been the three major debates. Did he actually die? Yes, he actually died. He actually did. His heart stopped beating. Blood stopped flowing through his veins. Life left him. There's no debating that. That is the point. When he's hanging on the cross, he cries out and breathes his last. The scriptures are very clear that he dies. The centurions were coming around and they were breaking the legs of those who were being crucified, but they didn't break Jesus' legs because they saw that he was already dead. Okay? So the scriptures, the centurions, they all confirm that Jesus was dead. Again, and I don't want to sound morbid. I don't want to sound like I'm driving this home. But it's really important for us to understand, which is why it's in the proclamation. Every one of the proclamations. The Apostles' Creed, he was crucified, died, and was buried. The death and the burial are so vital to our understanding of Christianity. The crucifixion. So crucified, died, and buried. Those three things, that he suffered this awful execution, that he actually died, and that he was laid in the tomb. Those 3 points are extraordinarily essential for our understanding of what God has done for us, for our understanding of grace and hope. They are essential because the resurrection doesn't make sense if the death isn't there. And the laying in the tomb doesn't, it all plays together. It's all necessary. So what we want to grasp, what we have to grasp, is that for our sake, Jesus faced this awful form of execution. He actually died, dead, death, done, and was laid in the tomb. Was laid in the tomb. His body wasn't left to rot on the ground. It wasn't left to rot on the cross. He was laid in the tomb. The stone was rolled in front of it. It was hastily done because we honor and we remember Christ's death on Good Friday, which is it's interesting because one would say, well, why do we call it Good Friday? It would be Awful Friday. Well, it's not Awful Friday. It's Good Friday because it's good for us. Christ's death is good for us. So that's why we call it Good Friday. However, so we know that Christ died approximately 3 p.m. on Good Friday. Sun was going down, which would have been leading to the Sabbath. They requested that the bodies come off the cross before the Sabbath. Pilate acquiesced to that, made sure they were dead. And Jesus was hastily wrapped in linens and placed in a tomb before sundown of the Sabbath. And that was the point, to get him off the cross and get him in the tomb before the Sabbath. This Sabbath was of great solemnity. It was a very holy Sabbath around Passover. So they wanted to get Jesus off the cross and in the tomb. So he was wrapped in linens and placed in a tomb, and the stone was sealed away. We see in the Easter stories where the women are debating about who's going to roll the stone away. So clearly this is a big stone. The tomb is sealed. Once you're in, there's no coming out. You can't get out from the inside. But this has to be when we fully grasp the idea that God would come down and die for us. Not just be like us, but to die for us. It's awe-inspiring. It actually causes us to stop and truly think about the importance of our existence. So, if we ever think, well, God doesn't care, well, God cares. It may not look like it. We may not have God sitting next to us, putting the divine arm around us and telling us that we're okay, but God cares. Because if God didn't care, God wouldn't go through any of this. God would have wiped us out. Or left us to our own devices and gone off and played golf around Pluto or whatever. But that's not what God does. God comes down, lives our life, and dies a death that we will never be able to experience or imagine. We might be able to create something in our head, but the excruciatingness of that, the mental, emotional, physical, that God would do that for us, is incredible. It's awe-inspiring. And it would have been much debate. There would have been much debate in the Council of Nicaea. The fact that God would even talk about God dying for us as an abomination, yada, yada, yada. But that's not the case. God actually died. So he suffered death and was buried. So that's the second pinnacle earthly thing. First, he's born of the Virgin Mary, became truly human. Then for our sake, he's crucified under Pontius Pilate. He suffered death and was buried. So he's executed, and the execution leads to death, dead. Heartbeat stop, blood stop flowing. And he's buried, placed in the tomb, sealed away forever. The belief is, the expectation is that once you're dead, you're dead. Okay, my friends, we're going to leave it here for today. We'll pick it up next week. And obviously, we know what happens. But we're going to talk about it. Again, it's the third pinnacle earthly event. But we get to Good Friday. So the week we'll consider it Holy Saturday. But again, these are important things to proclaim and be clear about. So the death of Jesus is something we need to be massively and completely clear about. He actually dies on the cross. Dead. All right, as always, my contact information will come up after the video. If you want to reach out to me, if you have any questions or thoughts or what have you, I encourage you to reach out. My email, Facebook contact, you can contact the church. I'll do the best I can to help out in any way, make something clear or bring about clarity. So please feel free to reach out. My friends, it was an honor to be with you today. We'll be back again next week for session 11 as we continue on in the Nicene Creed. I pray that whatever you face today, whatever you have, that it be joyous and that God reveal himself to you, maybe even in just the moment of whisper or the wind or a song. May you experience God in your life. May you experience the power of a God who died for you. God bless you. We'll see you again soon.